Okay, so we're going to be picking up on page 6, the very first paragraph. So we're in Bill's story, and as David would say, we're really in Bill's nightmare at this point. Okay, page 6, paragraph 1, David, alcoholic addict. Here we go. The remorse, horror, and hopelessness of the next morning are unforgettable. The courage to do battle was not there. My brain raced uncontrollably, and there was a terrible sense of impending calamity. I hardly dared cross the street, lest I collapse and be run down by an early morning truck, for it was scarcely daylight. An all-night place supplied me with a dozen glasses of ale. My writhing nerves were stilled at last. A morning paper told me that the market had gone to hell again. Well, so had I. The market would recover, but I wouldn't. That was a hard thought. Should I kill myself? No, not now. Then a mental fog settled down. Gin would fix that. So 2 bottles and oblivion. Ashton, you have anything from that?
I do. So I have calamity, meaning a state of distress. So my brain raced uncontrollably, and there was a terrible sense of impending distress. And I also have writhing, which means twisting and turning. So my twisting and turning nerves were stilled at last.
Awesome. Thank you. So I'm going to yield to David as I typically do. I just want to put one quick thought out of a lot of stuff being said by Bill in this paragraph. This is the thing that hits me in the feels every time I read it. The market would recover, but I wouldn't. That was a hard thought. Should I kill myself? He's asking himself if he ought to commit suicide. Remember 2 pages earlier? The papers reported men jumping to death from the towers of high finance. That disgusted me. I would not jump. How quickly the progression, the regression, the degression, the evolution of Bill's illness, what he so tightly held to, feeling strength and control, all of a sudden is gone. Go ahead, bro.
Started that paragraph off with, see if you can identify with this. Remember in Bill's story, we're going to see if we drink, think, or feel like Bill. This is an amazing description of an emotion. When we talk about page 27 of our book about this spiritual awakening that we have to have, where our ideas, our emotions, our attitudes, which once were the guiding forces of our life, that's what this is right here. These are the guiding forces of my life right now. This remorse, this horror, this hopelessness of the next morning are unforgettable. That is very dramatic, but also very true. It hits me right between the eyes. I have not forgot what that was like the next day when I woke up. It's also not describing, what it's not describing is the body or the mind. It's describing the unmanageability of my life. This is my unmanageability. This is the bedevilments. This is the 4 horsemen. This is irritable, restless, and discontented. This is all the descriptions that Bill's going to give us and the doctor's going to give us in the book of what this feels like, this remorse. Oh, what I did last night. Oh, my God. The horror. What did I do last night? And this is so unforgettable. Oh, my God. I remember doing that. And I spent all that money, and now I got to go back home. This is unforgettable. The courage to do battle was not there. No power, no choice, no control. Bill cannot stop drinking. And he can't. And once he starts, once he puts it in his body, he has no control of the amount he drinks. And once he stops, he cannot stay stopped. His brain, my brain, raced uncontrollably, and there was a terrible sense of impending doom. This event, regarded as significant, and as Ashton gave us a great definition, calamity, disaster, or ruin. This is what my life's looking like here. I hardly dare cross the street. This is fear gripping him, paranoia, another level of fear. I would class be run down by an early morning truck, for it was scarcely daylight. An all-night place supplied me with a dozen glasses of ale. This is Bill's solution. He has no choice. He has no control. He knows nothing about alcoholism. It has not been brought to his attention yet whatsoever. Alcohol is his only solution. My withering nerves are still at last. Here's the problem. A morning paper told me the market had gone to hell. As David pointed out again 2 pages ago, you know, he's thinking about suicide here. He's making fun of people who did it in the past. He's considering it now. This is how far down. This is the progression. Watch the progression as we keep going. He's going to get lower and lower to a bottom here. And then it says gin would fix that. Again, his solution at the bottom of the page. And so what happens? 2 bottles and then oblivion, which means I don't remember nothing. I am just done. Foggy, not even foggy. There's no coherence whatsoever.
So David's given us a real breakdown, right? Detailed blow by blow here. And I suspect many of us can relate to a lot of these feelings. But think about what he's describing here, even at the higher level, sort of a step up. Went into the bar to use the phone, ended up drunk, right? Said to hell with it, got obliterated. Woke up the next morning, had the remorse, the horror, and the hopelessness. What was he going to do? Suicidal, had no solution, head racing, that brainstorm. What's his solution? Finally, my solution worked. Had a dozen glasses of beer. Now I'm calm, right? Bill's solution is starting to fail him, right? Because the effects are ruining his life. But let's make no mistake. It's still a solution for Bill to some extent. His mind is racing. He feels awful. He doesn't know how he's going to go on. So how does he get through it? He drinks. Okay? Anybody relate to that? Oh, and I forgot to ask, like I typically do, if you can come on camera, don't hide from us. We're greedy. We want to see all your beautiful faces and look you in the eyes if you can. We know sometimes people can't, but please join us on camera if you can. The mind and body are marvelous mechanisms. For mine endured this agony 2 more years. Sometimes I stole from my wife's slender purse when the morning terror and madness were on me. Again, I swayed dizzily before an open window or the medicine cabinet where there was poison, cursing myself for a weakling. There were flights from city to country and back as my wife and I sought escape. Then came the night when the physical and mental torture was so hellish, I feared I would burst through my window, sash and all. Somehow I managed to drag my mattress to a lower floor, lest I suddenly leap. A doctor came with a heavy sedative. Next day found me drinking both gin and sedative. This combination soon landed me on the rocks. People feared for my sanity. So did I. I could eat little or nothing when drinking, and I was 40 pounds underweight. Ashton?
Yeah, so I have the definition for sash. So sash means the frame that holds the panes in a window. So I feared. Then came the night when the physical and mental torture was so hellish, I feared I would burst through my window, the frames that hold the panes in the window, and all. And that's all I got for that paragraph.
Thank you, Ashton. So the mind and body are marvelous mechanisms. You know, they really are even in recovery. Like as a recover, what a testimony to the human body that it does. It kind of regenerates itself. It starts to get better when we stop drinking. And we're going to find out later on in that paragraph that Bill's malnutritioned. I mean, he is like really getting, he's going to die, right, Ashton? I mean, she can give maybe a definition of that for us if you don't mind. So he endured this agony for 2 more years. So this is like after the market crashed in 1929. Now we're in 1930 to 1933. This is Bill. And again, this is not weak-willed. This has nothing to do with Bill's weak character or weak will. He's a real alcoholic. He's describing himself through this work here, what a real alcoholic looks like. Like, remember, guys, you don't have to go to this kind of a bottom necessarily, but I have to have the same emotions, some feeling. My bottom was just a feeling that this is my life and it's never going to get better than this. Yes, there are outside circumstances. Go down 3/4 of that page on page 6 in the second paragraph. It said, then came the night when the physical and mental torture was so hellish. The physical is the craving. The mental torture is depression. This is depression. This is part of the bedevilments that we'll read about on page 52 when you get there. And then this doctor that came was Dr. Leonard Strong, and he gave Bill a heavy sedative. You ever notice something about Bill's story here and Dr. Bob's story that parallel each other? And if you read Dr. Bob's story and you go to page 32 of the Good Old Timers, you'll see Bob's drug problem too. Bill had a drug problem, and so did Bob. And as a matter of fact, they really didn't hit their bottom until they were doing both, alcohol and drugs. Bob was doing the goofballs. Bill's having heavy sedatives brought on by a doctor. This soon landed me on the rocks. So what that means is when a ship wrecks and it lands on the rocks, it's destroyed, guys. It is done. You ain't repairing that ship. Bill's life is not going to get any better. It is shipwrecked. He is landed on the rocks. What? Bill is a poet, guys. I mean, give him lots of credit here for his description. It's just wonderful. People fear for my sanity. I feared for my own sanity. I won't go into that because we're reading Bill's story. I could eat little or nothing, and then again, back to Ashton, if she doesn't mind. What does that look like, malnutrition? If you would, please.
Yeah, so with malnutrition comes a lot of illness. We're actually going to talk about it later on this page of a major illness that he actually gets later on called wet brain, which I'll kind of go into, is due to lack of nourishment. But a lot of sickness, you're weak, and it's just not good.
Bad, right? Yeah.
Sorry, I wish I had a better way to state that.
That was Ashton's medical expertise on that one. Did everybody get that? Not
sorry,
good.
Ash. I put you on the spot.
It's all right.
My bad. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
So I'm just going to double back on a few things that David brought up here. First of all, what's Bill describing? We're seeing his descent. We're seeing how he's beating the crap out of himself. But how does he open this paragraph? The mind and body are marvelous mechanisms. For mine endured this agony 2 more years. Guys, what is David always asking when you read this, when we read this? Did you think like Bill? Did you drink like Bill? Did you feel like Bill? Can anybody relate to this behavior? Absolutely beating the crap out of myself and going on, not just day after day, not just week after week, but month after month and year after year. Some of us for decades, right? Sometimes stole from my wife's purse, right? But now, so first of all, he went from disgusted there were people jumping up the building. Then things are getting bad, and he's like, should I kill myself? So he's thinking about it. And then what's happening? Now he's dizzy in front of the window and taking his bed downstairs because he's afraid he's going to uncontrollably leap out the window and kill himself, right? So from disgust to fear to beyond fear, right? Like total no control, that the animal instinct to kill himself might take over any last bit of rational thinking he has, right? And then the doctor came, gave him a heavy sedative, and the next day found me drinking both gin and sedative. How about this? Anybody prescribes some medication? Doctor says, absolutely don't drink on this. And what's the first thing we did? Drink on it. Because when the doctor said that to me, what that meant was, man, I'm going to have a wicked buzz from this. If I'm not supposed to do it when I add the alcohol, it's going to be fantastic. But what happened? Combination soon landed me on the rocks. Right? People feared for my sanity. Now, we talk about the word sanity, and I probably mentioned this last week. I feel like I did. In the second step, and I know we're eons from getting to the coverage of the second step, but everyone here is, I'm sure, seen it on the wall or in the book. Second step is came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. What is talked about in the sanity of the second step is what we talked about in the doctor's opinion. Our brain's inability, right, to differentiate the true from the false when it occurs to us to pick up a drink prior to being recovered, right? We just can't do it. Our brain always says, pick it up. This kind of sanity here is people, including Bill, doesn't really understand that his illness is alcoholism. They just think he's sort of quote unquote crazy out of his mind. And so did he, because he just can't conceptualize that with every way in which he sees is burning his life to the ground, that this is an alcoholic illness. The only thing he can come up with is I must be loony, right? I might have a psychiatric problem. I'm just crazy. I fear for my sanity, and so does my wife and everyone around me. Could eat little or nothing else when drinking. I was 40 pounds underweight. drinking calories essentially. Right? Only. Entire sustenance. Can't survive that way. My brother-in-law is a physician, and through his kindness and that of my mother, I was placed in a nationally known hospital for the mental and physical rehabilitation of alcoholics. 1930s guys, right? Under the so-called belladonna treatment, my brain cleared. Hydrotherapy and mild exercise helped much. Best of all, I met a kind doctor who explained that though certainly selfish and foolish, I had been seriously ill bodily and mentally.
Anything, Ashton?
Yeah, so I'd like to comment on the belladonna treatment.
Please.
So the belladonna treatment is, doctors had used the Atropa belladonna, which is actually a poisonous plant, also known as deadly nightshade, but in small doses, it can cause a relaxing sedative effect, which is why they use it for alcohol withdrawal, because it kind of went through the same brain chemicals as alcohol, so they were safely able to kind of get through the withdrawal of everything.
Wow.
Cool. Thanks, Ash.
Great job. Thank you.
Yeah, how about that? They gave him a little poison, basically, to try to cure him of his alcoholism. Go ahead, David.
All right, so the brother-in-law again is Dr. Leonard Strong. He's the physician, and through the kindness and that of my mother, Dr. Emily Wilson, that's Bill's mom, I was placed in Towns Hospital for the mentally and physically rehabilitation of alcoholics. A world-renowned hospital for that. Great job on the detox description of the belladonna treatment. Then the hydrotherapy, I believe, is what? Hot water, blasting you with hot water, blasting you with cold water, blasting you with hot water, blasting you with cold water. I mean, have you ever seen the pictures? You got any pictures, Rob, of them guys standing against in a shower like cave area?
Maybe some
cement.
video.
Yeah, it's like crazy. But then it says, and a mild exercise helped much. Best of all, wait for it, guys. This is going to change our lives in Alcoholics Anonymous forever. This is Dr. Silkworth. This is who he met, a kind doctor. That is an understatement. This guy loved those alcoholics, who explained that though certainly selfish and foolish, I have also been seriously ill. This is the first time in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous that they're going to mention the word ill. This is the first time. Bodily, we know what that looks like. In the body, once I take a drink, I break out in craving, and mentally, the obsession of the mind. Not weak-willed. I have an illness. He's describing it here. So this is Bill's first visit to Towns Hospital in 1933, okay? 3 more visits yet to come.
So before the meeting tonight, we were just sort of jabbering and chatting and stuff, and we were talking about, Fosdick and the brother of Fosdick and some of these other historical people who have come up. Some of the most influential and pivotal people that led us to put together our program, none of whom were alcoholics. So David here is just starting to intro Dr. Silkworth, and we're going to hear a lot more about Dr. Silkworth. We already read the doctor's opinion. Now we're going to get sort of Bill's slant on his experience with Dr. Silkworth. But remember this, Dr. Silkworth, non-alcoholic, okay, physician, treated somewhere between 40 and 50,000 alcoholics and addicts over the course of his career. He's the guy that figured out alcoholism was an illness, right? He figured out our problem. Non-alcoholic doctor gave this gift to us. On the other side of the pond, we're going to learn about him further down the road. Another brilliant doctor, Carl Jung, a psychiatrist, a psychoanalyst. He figured out our solution. He didn't know anything about the problem. He didn't know how to get to the solution, but he figured out that what real alcoholics needed was a spiritual solution, a spiritual experience, right? And Dr. Silkworth over on this side of the ocean understood the problem, but he didn't know how to get anybody better. He couldn't get an alcoholic from the problem into the solution. Then we're going to hear a little bit about the Oxford group when Evie comes to see Bill here pretty shortly. Oxford group had some steps. They had a little program of action. They didn't understand or really even care about the problem of alcoholism. They weren't really trying to get people to a spiritual solution. They were trying to get people to live a first century Christ-like life. Dr. Jung, not an alcoholic. You know, the Oxford group, not alcoholics. Dr. Silkworth, not. All these non-alcoholics gave it all to us. The problem, the solution, how to get from the problem to solution. But then we needed an alcoholic in Bill Wilson to pull it all together. This is the beauty and the coincidence, the seconds and inches Joe and Charlie talk about, how this beautiful thing came to life. And I just want to underscore what David talked about as well. Though certainly selfish and foolish, I have been seriously ill bodily and mentally. Think about the power of this. Let's look in the mirror at ourselves, not out the window. Well, you know what I mean? Look in the mirror, look out the window. When I'm looking for blame, I look out the window, I'm like, well, I'm not the problem. There's something outside of me is the problem. I look in the mirror, I'm saying, okay, I see the problem. So as I'm getting better, as I'm starting to recreate my life, as I'm doing this work, as I'm eventually getting into writing inventory and then amends list and things, I don't get to go out into the world with this mentality that, oh, well, I'm ill, and so everything I did, you know, I can't be blamed for. No, no, no. Let's be clear. Certainly selfish and foolish. And I would say heavy emphasis on selfish, right? We don't get to dismiss those behaviors just because we're sick. Let's see. It relieved me somewhat to learn that in alcoholics, the will is amazingly weakened when it comes to combating liquor, though it often remains strong in other respects. My incredible behavior in the face of a desperate desire to stop was explained. Understanding myself now, I fared forth in high hope. For 3 or 4 months, the goose hung high. I went to town regularly and even made a little money. Surely this was the answer. Self-knowledge. Ashton, go ahead.
I have a definition for fared, which means to journey. So understanding myself now, I journeyed forth in high hope.
Thank you, Ashton. So here's Bill. He's relieved he's relieved somewhat to learn that an alcoholic's will is amazingly weak when it comes to combating liquor. So we're talking about the two folds of this disease. That's what the doctor's explaining to him, that once he puts alcohol in his body, he has an abnormal reaction to it, which is called, in the doctor's opinion, the phenomenon of craving. It's not a phenomenon. We know why it happens today. It's just a craving. Once I start, it cannot stop. I need the 10th one more. I need the first. He's also talking about the obsession of the mind, the greater part of this illness, that he cannot control. Once he thinks about it, it becomes an obsession. Without his consent, without his agreement, he picks up a drink. Then it says, my incredible behavior in the face of this desperate desire to stop was explained. Well, it's also explained by Dr. Carl Jung, as David pointed out on page 26 of our book, in 26 on the second paragraph, when Roland went back out and drank again and came back to Jung, and then he says, so he returned to the doctor, whom he admired, and asked him point blank why he could not recover. He wished above all things to regain self-control. He seemed quite rational, well balanced with respect to other problems. And this is going to be talking about here in a second, in what Bill is, because it says there on page 7 in the second paragraph, understanding myself, I fared forth in high hope for 3 or 4 months. All other aspects of his life, he had some kind of rational decisions, could do things somewhat well. In Roland's story, back on page 26 in the second paragraph, Dr. Jung says, yet he had no control whatsoever over alcohol, and then he explains why that is. So we go back to page 7, second paragraph. It said the goose hung high. So to respect what that means here is when the goose hung high is when these geese flew low, it meant the evil spirits were present. And this is the 19th century kind of thinking. And when the geese flew high, they hung high, evil spirits were gone over their fields. That means they're going to have good crops. If they flew low, bad crops. It's superstition. So the goose hung high. He's full of spirit here. He thinks it's going to be okay. I went to town regular and even made a little money. Surely this was the answer. self-knowledge. What I know in Alcoholics Anonymous, Cocaine Anonymous will not keep me sober. This is a program of action. I must know, I must perform an action in this book. In the chapter Into Action, and at the end of the chapter Into Action, it says, now there must be action and more action. This is, you want to be a verb in Alcoholics Anonymous, you do not want to be a noun.
So, and Bob added some pictures of guys getting hydrotherapy treatment in the chat. So take a look at that. It's crazy looking, but I guess it could be worse, right? Could be crazier. But thank you for that great contribution, Bob.
Rob.
So it relieved me somewhat to learn that in Alcoholics the Will is amazingly weakened when it comes to combating liquor. Though it often remains strong in other respects. And I think a lot of us can relate to that too. We kept the career going. We kept the relationship going. We kept a lot of things going. We were able to maintain control, or at least, perseverance, but we had no control over alcohol as it continued to, embattle us. But most importantly, my incredible behavior in the face of a desperate desire to stop was explained. The doctor had to explain it. And it didn't take for Bill yet because he made this tragic mistake. Bill assumed that once he understood the problem, because he was a smart guy who could outthink or outmuscle everything, self-knowledge was going to be sufficient. And as I've said repeatedly, the worst possible thing could happen. He was right, but he was only right for a little while. He was right for 3-4 months. But then we're going to find out self-knowledge was in fact not enough, right? But for that little period, he was probably feeling pretty good. Now that I understand it, I'll just have to keep this in mind and I won't drink again. That was his belief system. So surely this was the answer, self-knowledge. Spoiler, but it was not. For the frightful day came when I drank once more. The curve of my declining moral and bodily health fell off like a ski jump. After a time, I returned to the hospital. This was the finish, the curtain, it seemed to me. My weary and despairing wife was informed it would all end with heart failure during delirium tremens, or I'd develop a wet brain perhaps within a year. She would soon have to give me over to the undertaker or the asylum. What you got, Ashton?
I've been really excited for this paragraph. So,
right, take your time.
I'm going to start with malnutrition again, since now I'm not on the spot and my brain is a little less blank. But so with malnutrition, so you have to fuel your body. If you're not getting enough food or water, it affects all of your organs, including like your skin, your brain, your heart, everything. And it can get to the point where you can even go into organ failure. So start with a definition of a wet brain. So the 1938 Webster Dictionary's definition is severe and permanent brain damage or disease such that one can no longer care for oneself, thus requiring permanent personal care. But the medical definition of wet brain is kind of a long one. So it stands for Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome. So it's a brain and memory disorder due to a lack of thiamine, which is vitamin B1, caused by poor nutrition and long-term heavy drinking. It's seen more often in long-term heavy drinkers because in long-term alcohol abuse, you cause a lot of irritation to your stomach and your digestive tract, and so you can't absorb nutrients that well. And thiamine plays a very important role in creating messengers in the brain. So there are two different stages of this disorder. The first stage is the Wernicke encephalopathy. Encephalopathy meaning a disorder that affects the brain's function. This is sudden and severe brain disorder, but it is treatable. It comes with confusion, uncoordinated movements, and visual changes. And without treatment, they can cause lasting brain and nerve cell damage, which leads to the second stage of it. Korsakoff syndrome causes severe memory loss and inability to form new memories. It's also known as alcoholic dementia.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a lot there. So I also wanted to go into delirium tremens, but starting off with withdrawal. So withdrawal, it means an abnormal physical and or psychological symptoms that occur right after the abrupt stop of a substance that has a capability of producing physical and psychological dependence. So with alcohol withdrawal, there's a wide range of symptoms from mild to severe. So your mild symptoms include mild tremors, headaches, nausea, and vomiting. But when you talk about delirium tremens, that is the most severe form of alcohol withdrawal, and it is life-threatening. Comes with confusion, agitation, hallucinations, high heart rate, high blood pressure, seizures, loss of consciousness, and even death.
I'm guessing those are not the good kind of hallucinations.
No, it's not. Sadly, it is not.
Wow.
Awesome.
Great
Thank
job.
you, Ashton. Great.
Phenomenal. So top of the paragraph, wonderful job, Ashton. So, but it was not for the frightful day came when I drank once more. We know why he drank, because of the obsession. That's why he drank. He had no control. He had no choice. He had no power. He's going to pick up a drink. Knowledge was not good enough, was not sufficient enough to keep Bill sober. And then I love this next one. What a great mental image. Picture, watch this. The curve of my declining moral and bodily health fell off like a ski jump. What a beautiful description that really is. What a great reference of the progression. That's part of this progression here still. After a time, I returned to the hospital. He went back to the hospital. This is now the summer of 1934, his second visit to Towns Hospital.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have much to add to that. I think Ashton did such a bang-up job of describing, those medical conditions. But what was being told? So the harms that our alcohol consumption and our alcoholic illness causes to us, we've been seeing a lot of that for Bill. Well, what's happening to his poor wife this whole time? We're getting a couple references here and there. She had to go work when, before, I guess, Bill was a huge breadwinner, and then now he's stealing from that slender purse, but dragging her around city to the country. And now what is his wife being told here on his second hospitalization? That it's all going to end with heart failure during delirium tremens, or he's going to get a wet brain perhaps within the year. She's going to have to give him over to the undertaker, to the asylum. So forever institutionalized or dead. There were only two alternatives being painted here by Dr. Silkworth. Right? There was no third option. There was no, well, he might get better. It was he's going to die or he's going to be institutionalized. That's it. They did not need to tell me. I knew and almost welcomed the idea. It was a devastating blow to my pride. I, who had thought so well of myself and my abilities, of my capacity to surmount obstacles, was cornered at last. Now I was to plunge into the dark, joining that endless procession of sots who had gone on before. Thought of my poor wife. There had been much happiness after all. What would I not give to make amends? Ding, 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 ding. But that was over now.
So I have the definition of SOTS. SOTS is a person with faculties dulled by excessive drinking. So now I was to plunge into the dark, join in the endless procession of a person with faculties dulled by excessive drinking who had gone on before.
Thank you, Ashton. Yeah, so in this bottom of that page is seven, the fourth paragraph, they did not need to tell me. So the doctor is actually speaking to Lois, but Bill's overhearing this, and he knew and almost welcomed the idea. He'd rather just freaking end it all. I mean, he is, pay attention to the hopelessness here. And as we graduate through this paragraph, we're going to really see what hopelessness for Bill is, the bottom for him. It was a devastating blow to my pride. Well, as low as Bill is right now, physically and mentally, he still chooses to use the word pride there, and followed up with who had thought so well of myself, my abilities, my capacity to surmount obstacles. This is a little bit of big shotism and ego, right? That he's using that kind of language there. And then it says, was cornered at last. This is him saying to us, he's cornered hopelessness. He understands what this means all of a sudden. Now I was to plunge into the dark, joining the endless processions of sots who had gone on before me. So he's relating to other people who just could not pull themselves out of that quicksand. I thought of my poor wife. So a little self-pity's coming on here. There had been much happiness after all there was. What would I do to make amends? But that was over for now. Bill's leveling his pride. He's understanding the fact that he's got no power over this thing. He is done, good and for all. So he thinks. So he tries to get sober on knowledge. We find out that doesn't work. Now he's going to try to get sober on fear. And fear directly comes from self-reliance and and he's going to find out that he can't stay sober on fear either.
So now he's saying he'd rather be dead. Kind of welcomes it. It was a devastating blow to my pride. So Bill is now a shell of his former self. Who was he on page 1? I'll remind you. My talent for leadership, I imagine, would place me at the head of vast enterprises, which I would manage with the utmost assurance. What was he saying on page 2? The drive for success was on. I'd proved to the world I was important. Now what is he saying? Now he's saying they didn't need to tell me I was heading to the undertaker or to the asylum. I knew and almost welcomed the idea. He has lost all hope, which is a great place to be for an alcoholic and an addict. The opportunity to get better. Thought so well of myself, my abilities, my capacity to surmount obstacles. Bill, I was just like Bill. I thought I could outthink or outmuscle everything. And now he's saying I'm just going to be like another person who's burned out, used up, beat to crap. And as I brought up, poor Lois, right? All these harms we inflict. She's just hanging on there, stealing her hope with every sweet promise that he's going to get better. No words can tell of the loneliness and despair I found in that bitter morass of self-pity. Quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I had met my match. I'd been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master.
I have the definition for morass. So morass means a complicated or confused situation. So no words can tell of the loneliness and despair I found in that bitter, complicated, or confused situation of self-pity.
Bill's being a little poetic here, right? I mean, he's really visualizing some stuff here. So in using some $20 words, the bitter morass of self-pity. No words could tell of the loneliness and despair. So he's saying he was experiencing depths of loneliness and desperation that he'd never experienced in life, all a result of the alcohol. Quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I mean, I don't know what the dictionary definition of quicksand. I'll tell you, growing up, I was convinced, quicksand was all over television when we were kids, right? I was convinced one of the 3 ways I was going to die was in quicksand. What is it? It looks safe. Looks like a little, piece of sand or a mud puddle. I step into it and I get stuck. And the more frantic I move in there, the quicker it sucks me down. If I can be still, I can keep just sort of hanging out, surviving, but there's no escape through quicksand on my own, right? It's such a beautiful analogy he's using here. What does he go on to say? I had met my match. I had been overwhelmed. So first, I've met my match. He met his equal in alcohol. But what's his immediate next statement? Now I've been overwhelmed. Met his equal, now toppled by more than his equal. Alcohol was my master. Alcohol owned Bill. He loved it. He hated it. He needed it. He despised it. Right? It's just like Gollum with the ring, right? In Lord of the Rings. Drawn to it, obsessed, but powerless to do anything about it.
So I'll add just very little here. No words can tell of the loneliness and despair. Bill has never been for a loss of words, and this is what he comes up with. And then this morass, this bog, this swamp. I mean, if we're in Scotland or Ireland and we see what that looks like, I've seen it on TV before. They put a foot in, the next thing you know, you're stuck. Your poop comes off. You put your other foot down. You ain't getting out. You're just not getting out. It's a great description, of what that looks like. And then self-pity, an excessive thought of my own troubles. Like I can't think beyond myself here. I found in a quicksand stretch around, like David said, I remember watching Tarzan as a kid, and he would fall in the quicksand, and then Cheetah would come and throw him. Well, we got some Popeye references tonight. Now we got some Tarzan stuff, showing our age here. But some of the Cheetah would give him his tail or something. I don't know, pull him out of the quicksand. You're gonna die. You're going to die without help from that. And I had met my match. Terry threw it in the chat. I've been overwhelmed. Powerlessness. This is the description. This is Bill starting to admit his first step. Alcohol was my master. It's not a concession. It's not conceding my innermost self yet, but he's acknowledging the fact he has no power, no choice, no control.
Let's also say one other little thing about overwhelm, though. So we're here in Bill's descent, Bill's nightmare, what he was like, part of Bill's story. And Terry just gave us that overwhelmed equals powerlessness. For sure, powerless, for sure. Way down the road, we're going to talk about an overwhelming God consciousness. So there's the other side of the coin for overwhelm. Here we're talking about the power of being overwhelmed, right? Which is bringing Bill to this point of powerlessness and hopelessness and despair so you can start to get better. Later in Bill's solution, in our solution, we're going to be overwhelmed with a God consciousness, which is going to solve our problems, which is going to fix us. So there's good and evil, right, on the coin of what is to be overwhelmed. Trembling, I stepped from the hospital, a broken man. Fear sobered me for a bit. Anybody relate to that? Then came the insidious insanity of that first drink. And on Armistice Day, 1934, I was off again. Everyone became resigned to the certainty that I have to be shut up somewhere or would stumble along to a miserable end. How dark it is before the dawn. In reality, that was the beginning of my last debauch. I was soon to be here we go, now we're getting some hope. I was soon to be catapulted into what I like to call the fourth dimension of existence. I was to know happiness, peace, and usefulness in a way of life that is incredibly more wonderful as time passes.
Have anything, Ashton?
No.
Okay. You want to go, David, or?
No, go ahead, bro.
Okay. All right. So the insidious insanity. What is that? That's the obsession. That is the obsession. So the insidious part of it is, okay, like I like to watch wildlife shows sometimes. And if you watch a lion laying in wait for that rabbit to make that one move, and then he's gone. He grabs that. That's the obsession. That's the insidious insanity of freaking gonna get me. And I'm gonna drink again. I got no power. I'm gonna do that, of that first drink. And then on Armistice Day in 1934, I was off again. And the story behind that was Bill's full of this knowledge, and he meets a guy at a golf course. And as he goes to this golf course, he's telling this guy about all the knowledge that he had about alcoholism that he learned from Dr. Soakworth. And he's sitting there telling him about this, and the guy is amazed by Bill and his story. But it's Armistice Day, and in this cafe, they're going to celebrate November 11th, the end of the war. They give out a shot to everybody. Bill picks up the drink and he drinks, and the guy looks at him like, "Are you freaking crazy, dude? After what you just told me, once you take a drink, you can't stop, and once you stop, you cannot. Or when you try to stop, you cannot stay stopped." He was amazed that Bill did this. Everyone became resigned to the certainty that I would have to be shut up somewhere, or I would stumble along in a miserable end. That is it. It's either covered up, locked up, or sobered up, guys. Those are my three options. Those are Bill's three options there. How dark it is before the dawn. The reality is that was the beginning of the last debauch. Debauch is a drinking spree. I assume it would be catapulted into, this is a step one promise, what I call the fourth dimension. This is the real first promise of the big book in the big book. I mean, we had one in the title page, and we've had them throughout when we talk about recovery. But the fourth dimension is, and I'm not going to go into the whole thing tonight because we don't really have a lot of time. but because of Sigmund Freud and all this other stuff. But let's talk about the fourth dimension is used in the book 3 times. This is outside of the normal thing. This is a dimension that I haven't experienced before. Bill's experienced something different than he's ever had. And what does that look like for Bill? Happiness, peace, and usefulness in a way of life that I had not ever even touched before. This is our way of living. The book describes it. If you like what we have, our way of living, this is incredibly more wonderful as time passes. How about, Emmy, how many times in Alcoholics Anonymous, Cocaine Anonymous do we hear, keep coming back? It gets better. Don't stop coming back. Keep doing this work, and it does get better. It's absolutely positively going to get better if you do this work honestly and thoroughly. Bill's not even done any work here yet. He's already explained to us what an experience looks like of being rocketed into the fourth dimension. I know what that feels like today. I live in the disciplines of 10, 11, and 12. I've made all my amends. I do what I'm supposed to be doing in Alcoholics Anonymous. I have a triangle, an equilateral triangle, and because of that, and because of the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, a good sponsor, and a relationship of power today, I'm safe and protected. Bill's not safe and protected yet. Bill's just describing what it looks like to have a touch of what this looks like, feels like.
So he's beaten. Alcohol owns him now. Trembling, I step from the hospital, broken man. Again, it's a good way to be, to get better, is broken. Fear sobered me up for a bit. So what's he talking about here? He's not talking about being recovered for a bit. What he's talking about is being physically sober. He's not drinking. He's still, batshit crazy in his head, spiritually ill, but at least he's not putting it in his body. And fear sobers a lot of us up for a little bit. What happens in most of our experience when we're first introduced to 12-step recovery? Someone says, well, come to a meeting, and they say, don't drink, don't use, don't, overeat, whatever it is. We come in, and we're all fear-driven at that point. And we come in and we white knuckle. We're holding on so tightly that our knuckles turn white. That's what the expression comes from, right? Holding on so tight. And it's almost always fear-based because it's almost always an external circumstance that forces us to come into 12-step recovery. Rarely, I'm going to say this, never have I heard anybody say, I just woke up this morning and decided to get better. No, it's the kids were getting taken away, or I lost my job, or my liver's failing, or any of the thousands of circumstances that could happen. These are the things that force us to come in. And at the beginning, before I'm recovered, fear can help sober me up for a bit. But if I don't move from fear into something God and other centered, I'm doomed to go right back out. So then came the insidious insanity of the first drink. David talked about this because the obsession hadn't left him. The obsession doesn't go away just because I'm physically sober. I got to get spiritually better. And everyone's resigned to certainty. We're going to have to lock him up, or he's going to, if he's lucky, maybe have an alcoholic death. How dark before the dawn. Bill's getting more poetic here as we're getting closer to salvation. The beginning of his last debauch, so the beginning of the end, the positive end for him. He's going to be catapulted. You guys know what a catapult is, right? From the back in the time of the knights and the castles, you pull it back and then it flings, right? So think about Bill being poetic here. He's going to be thrown at a high speed velocity. He's going to be catapulted into the fourth dimension of existence, a new way of living. He's going to know happiness, peace, and usefulness in a way of life incredibly more wonderful as time passes. Let's get a little bit more bleak. We'll read one more and then we'll wrap it up for this week. Near the end of that bleak November, I sat drinking in my kitchen. With a certain satisfaction, I reflected there was enough gin concealed about the house to carry me through that night and the next day. My wife was at work. I wondered whether I dared hide a full bottle of gin near the head of our bed. I would need it before daylight. Ashton, anything?
Yeah, I have the definition for bleak. Bleak meaning cold and sharp. So near the end of that cold and sharp November, I sat drinking in my kitchen.
Always my fear, did I have enough stashed? Because my wife would pour it out, smash it, do all kinds of crazy stuff. She couldn't stand it anymore. So he's coming. So I've met hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of alcoholics, and I've never met a stupid one. I've met some dumb ones, but I've never met a stupid one. And we put some stuff. We need to do what we need to do. And I remember I sponsored many guys who, after they got sober, 3 months after they got sober, they went into a drawer they haven't been in. They found a full bottle. Terry's story is that in his golf bag. I listen intently, Terry, when you talk. And so it's just like, you never know what we did just to survive. I can't be without. And the thing is, I would need it before the daylight. He knew the truth. He knew the truth. He could not go without that pesky golf bag Terry just put on there, right? That's where he put his booze at. I identify with it. Yeah. It is a golf bag fault. That's all I got there. Thanks.
Yeah, I think we're good. I'm going to wrap it up here.